The Rangers are in the middle of a 9-game West Coast road trip as we tape this week's episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And as always, I'm Evan Grant. That's my only part in the intro.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So the Rangers lost 2 out of 3 to the defending World Series champion Dodgers this past weekend. They're in the middle of a 4-game series in Sacramento against the Athletics, the surprising Athletics, who are battling the Rangers for first place in a strange division here early on, Evan. And a lot of things have happened, and we talk about the Rangers as we speak right now, and they've got some bullpen issues as you're out there on the West Coast.
Yeah, and as we speak, they were in the middle of trying to solve that. But that's going to be a scramble all season, John. You know, I just did a Rangers YouTube because all I do is various multimedia events, and the bullpen was a big topic, and there were no real answers. And even with whatever moves the Rangers end up making in the bullpen over the next day or so, as we record this, it's going to be a scramble all season. I think that is the underlying lesson from what we've learned through spring training and the start of the regular season. There wasn't a lot of money spent on relievers. The farm system is a little bit thin on upper level relievers right now. There aren't a number of guys still available out there, and so for a while it's going to be a scramble. You know, I think if this team is good, if this team gets through these first 40 games, if they make a little bit of a run in May and into June, I think Chris Young will be proactive in trying to go out and get, you know, more leverage arms to fill out that bullpen. But I don't think that's going to present itself as an option until the middle of June at the earliest.
And you say that, but you know, with the potential injuries to a couple of guys pending right now, several guys have pitched great. Jalen Beeks, Jacob Junis, Tyler Alexander, Cole Winn, to name a few. But again, as you mentioned, it's just trying to find roles and who's going to pitch those leverage innings late in games.
Absolutely. And listen, I think they've been proactive on this front. You know, you didn't see Skip Schumacher waste a lot of time waiting for Robert Garcia or Chris Martin, who appears to be injured at this point in time, to work out their issues. He made changes at the back end of the bullpen, and Jacob Latz and Jacob Junis have basically become the high leverage guys. I thought the one really good outcome from Tuesday, I should say, was that Robert Garcia came into a game with a one-run situation. The Rangers were down by a run, but he pitched really effectively for an inning and 2/3. The Rangers, as Skip has said, need to get Garcia back in the right direction because he's got the best stuff right now in the bullpen. All the metrics, all the analytics that the Rangers cite have Garcia with the best metric body of work. It's just a matter of executing. You know, this is a guy who I think cares so much and tries so hard that sometimes it speeds the game and his execution up on him.
And as we speaking of the starting pitching and the rotation, you've got to have a night like Tuesday night when Mackenzie Gore's not at his best, can't make it through the 5th inning or whatever. That even taxes the bullpen more. But let's talk about Gore a little bit, because he's pitched really well until Tuesday night in Oakland, where he just didn't seem to have any command of or any idea of where the strike zone was. And it was kind of perplexing, but that's kind of his history, right, with the Nationals?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great body of stuff to call back on, but look, there are a number of walks in his history, right? He's walked a number of hitters, and he's gone through these periods where he's kind of lost command of the strike zone. And the thing that's he is a number one talent. The thing that's going to allow him to be a number one is better being able to make adjustments when things go wrong. After the game on Tuesday, when he was asked about, what went wrong, he's the answers were a little bit along the lines of not really sure. Felt good, just couldn't really execute my pitches. And you will have nights like that. There are going to be nights where it's going to be a struggle. And if the worst thing that happens is on a night when it's a struggle, you get the game to the fifth inning and it's a one-run game, your team is down by 2, you live with it. But on a team that has so little room for margin for error, and as important as Mackenzie Gore is to this rotation, you want to be able to see an ability to make that adjustment quicker. I think he walked 4 of 6 batters. It went 4 batters in a 6-batter stretch at one point last night. He's going to have to be able to get it back in line a little bit more quickly. I do think the presence of Eovaldi and DeGrom, and I'm sure he talked to them after last night, and I'm sure there's some feedback. I think this is one of those opportunities where those guys may be able to help him come up with some mechanisms that help him get back on track more quickly.
And you mentioned that margin of error, and Rangers scoring 8 runs in the first game of this series. A lot of it on Jake Berger's back there, but then held to 1 run last night when Jeffrey Springs, 4th left-handed starter the Rangers have seen this season. Rangers are now 1-3 against lefties, and I think you've talked about it's still a very small sample size. But what have you kind of seen from the lineup so far when it faces a southpaw?
Well, when they face the old Portsiders, John, since we're going to dive into old baseball jargon, the issue isn't the Rangers' left-handed hitters. They've got a great situation for platooning for most of their lefties. The 2 lefties who are going to play every day are Brandon Nimmo and Corey Seager. Nimmo's hitting lefties just fine this year, and he's always had pretty neutral splits. Seager has had much more success against right-handed pitchers, but his numbers against right-handed pitchers are off the charts. His numbers against lefties are above average for a left-handed hitter. He's off to a little bit of a slow start against lefties this year. He's off to a little bit of a slow start in general this year, but that's not the problem. The issue has been some of these complementary right-handed bats. Josh Young is 3 for 16 against lefties this year. He's got a 666 OPS against lefties since the start of 2024. This is a guy who crushed lefties his rookie season. Had a 995 OPS against lefties his rookie season, and I think the Rangers expected that to continue, and it's done nothing but leak since. Wyatt Langford last year, and really, in 2024 when he was a rookie and he was hitting lower in the lineup, when he faced lefties, particularly left-handed relievers, it was a lower tier of left-handed relievers. It wasn't the prime guys because those were being saved to face Seager in the middle. And so his numbers against left-handed pitching were high, but mostly based on what he did against left-handed relievers in 24. It leaked a little bit last year, and he's 0 for 16 against left-handed pitchers of any type to start this year. Again, I think, now he's going to face, when he faces left-handed starters, the Rangers have faced really good ones, right? They face Springs, Sanchez, Rogers, and Luzardo. And listen, John, over the next 3 weeks, they've probably got 2 dates with Max Fried. They've got another date with Jeffrey Springs. They've got a date with Tarek Skubal, and they've probably got a date with Framber Valdez. So it ain't going to get any easier against lefties. But I also think the adjustment that Wyatt has right now is when he does face left-handed relievers, he's also facing top-tier left-handed relievers because they're coming in to get that lane of Nimmo, now Wyatt, and Corey. So he's getting the best left-hander any bullpen has to offer.
And we talked about the schedule, and again, the Rangers at this point, they're 9-8 as we speak on this through a very tough 40-plus game stretch to start the season that features, Rangers to this point played 11 of their 17 games on the road. The next road trip is another 3-city jaunt, so to speak. So they've just got to kind of tread water at this point in some respects in a division that looks like, at least early on here, you've got a couple of real discrepancies. Houston can pound the ball; they can't pitch because of the injuries, and Seattle is kind of vice versa. where they've got the strong pitching, and their offense has been much worse than the Rangers. So it's kind of a time over this first month and a half or so where the Rangers just have to kind of stay competitive.
Yes, and look, the fact that they're 9-8 after 17 games, John, I wouldn't have expected them to be any better than that. They have done what they need to do to this point. The only if you're looking for the glass half empty perspective, it is that since Seattle and Houston have struggled, you'd love to see the Rangers be able to capitalize on that more. They haven't been able to face the Astros yet. They don't get that until the middle of May. In the first series against Seattle, they did what they needed to do. They swept them. They absolutely capitalized on it. So it's hard for me to find real fault with where the Rangers are, but I think the reality though is we know what margin for error this team has, and we know how hard this schedule is, and so you're trying to keep track of making sure that this team stays on course to be able to navigate that and navigate the long-term issues.
And again, we can talk about the lineup and what it has and hasn't done, but Brandon Nimmo has been everything you wanted at the top of the lineup.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, look, his at-bats, I've seen much higher quality at-bats this year. Now, I think the Rangers can still improve some of their at-bat quality, but I've seen more high-quality at-bats this year than I recall seeing at any point in time last year, and I think that starts with Nimmo. I made a point in a column that I wrote off of the first game in Sacramento about the quality of at-bat that Jake Berger took, and it was a small thing. He had homered in his first two at-bats on Monday night, but the third time he came up, the Rangers were having one of those innings that we saw all too frequently last year, where pitcher would come back into the dugout, and before he could even catch his breath or think about the next inning, he's back out on the mound. It was a 5-pitch inning at that point in time. Berger took the first pitch, took his time around the plate, was very deliberate, worked an 8-pitch at bat before ending up grounding out. And I think that gave Nathan Eovaldi time to catch his breath. And Nathan likes to script out 8 to 10, 12 pitches, before he goes back on the mound, gave him time to think. And Skip Schumacher made note of that. Other people made note of that. And the Rangers had addressed that in a meeting in Los Angeles over the weekend, that there had been a little bit of a prevalence for these quick innings and something that really kind of hurt them last year. And for me, the message there was, look, they're aware of this. The coaching staff is aware of it. And the players are trying to apply what the coaching staff is actually asking them to do. So I think that was a real big win for this team on that front.
And talk a little bit about defense has been very strong for the most part. Wyatt Langford is back in the lineup as the DH last night, assuming he'll be back in the outfield here in the next day or two, right? Just trying to be a little bit careful with that.
Yeah, I think, my guess would be in the field here in Sacramento looks beautiful. My 52nd ballpark in which I've ever covered a game, I'd like to point out.
Congratulations. You're 10 behind me. That's okay.
The field looks the field looks beautiful, but I also am just going to guess that the Rangers will probably give him through this series before they get him out on the field, on the grass, playing the outfield. They'll wait till they get to Seattle. That would be my guess. I think, the thing with Langford is you would just like to see him be off to a little bit quicker start. This is a big year for Wyatt. This is a cornerstone franchise type talent, and he's made progress in each of his first 2 years. I think the expectation is that Wyatt becomes an 800 OPS guy this year. He's off to a little bit of a slow start on that front.
So we'll see what happens here. Again, big series in Seattle. Like you said, the Rangers capitalized on it the first time when the Mariners came into Arlington last week. And then the schedule, as we've talked about, really doesn't get much easier here. You've got to play the Yankees coming up here. The Yankees have gotten off to a fast start. Pittsburgh, to open the homestand next week, has played well. So you've got to capitalize when you're at home as well.
Absolutely, especially early. The Rangers need to capitalize on their home games because that's what's going to keep them afloat with such a heavy road schedule. You can only hope to go 500 on the road in best case scenario, and that would be a big improvement for the Rangers over the last couple of years. When they're at home in April and May, and through June, really, they really need to take advantage of those games and make up and be successful. They can't allow homestands to get frittered away. I think they did a good job after the Red Series went awry of salvaging the homestand by beating Seattle. And look, it may have just been a 3-3 homestand, but you beat the team that you're going to be chasing this year, or that you hope to supersede in the American League West. So I thought that was a good finish to that homestand. I feel like at the 10% mark of this season, I feel like it has gone about like I expected it would. I do think the starting pitching has been even a little bit more impressive than I thought it would be. I think the bullpen has struggled in the way that we thought, but we've seen some good performances there.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen some uneven performances. The lineup is still kind of finding itself. I do feel like I've seen better, more consistent approaches. It hasn't always produced results, but I think overall. So if I'm grading this team after 10% of the way through the year, I give them, at least a B. I think it's been a very successful start to the season. I think the messaging has been good, and I think that I think there is real buy-in here.
Okay, speaking of rating, how would you rate Sacramento, since this is your first time in there as a major league ball writer? How would you rate Sacramento compared? Certainly, I don't want to even compare it to the Bay Area. So, but how would you rate Sacramento?
Well, it's a cool little town, and it still does feel more like the downtown still feels a little bit more like a little town, even though you've got the very beautiful California State Capitol right sitting there in the middle, and you've got a major league franchise in the Sacramento Kings in downtown, and what really made it a big league town was on Monday Night Raw was here ahead of WrestleMania, so all of the stars of the WWE had descended upon town. So, listen, my experience in most of these towns is maybe finding a restaurant and the ballpark, and clearly, Sutter Health Park is a minor league ballpark. The A's have made the best of the situation there. And the one thing I wanted to see was how enthusiastic fans would be at these games. And while they're only getting about 8,000 fans, I do feel like people are having a good experience here. And it's a difficult situation because this is a transient team. They're not Sacramento's team. They're not going to be Sacramento's team.
They're not staying, right?
They're not even identified as the Sacramento A's. So I do think fans are enjoying the amount of time here. All of that said, I still think that Major League Baseball, put themselves in this situation. They shouldn't have had to go this route. If they wanted to move the A's to Vegas, they should have been more proactive in getting something done in Vegas so that there would be a stadium ready. If they wanted to keep them in the Bay Area, they should have done what they needed to do with Oakland or with one of the Bay Area communities to get something done. It's just a shame for the A's organization that they're having to play in lesser facilities right now. Sacramento folks have done the best they can with it, but the A's have a good young team, and they're going to be challenged by their situation here in Sacramento this year and next year, bottom line.
And it's hard for the players as well because you're not getting the big fan base, you're not getting the home crowd. And unlike Globe Life Field, which has become a big home field advantage, at least from the crowd and the aesthetics and the noise, you're never going to have that in Sacramento. But hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your time there, and then it's on to Seattle. Evan's getting a lot of mileage here in the first couple months of the season, and traveling a lot all over the country. And when we come back, we'll talk about our Archives in Arlington segment this week, which will have a presidential spin. We'll be right back. Well, normally we probably wouldn't have spent so much time with Evan talking about his travels on the West Coast. You may have noticed that we had to filibuster a little this week because of some technical difficulties that precluded us having our guest. But Evan, you did a marvelous job.
Well, I'm very good when it comes to just like running my mouth. So it's one of the things I do well. We'll call this the one where Evan filibusters. And we should be back with our regularly programmed our regularly scheduled guests next week. We apologize for not having guests this week, but there was a lot to talk about at the 10% mark of the season. And when we come back, John, I expect to hear a little bit about some Ranger archives. Maybe it's got a presidential bent to it.
There's always the Ranger archives, even when we can't get the guests. I'm going all the way back, Evan. You know I like anniversaries. So I'm going back 65 years to the start of the franchise in Washington, D.C. in 1961. It was April 10th, 1961. They played the first game in franchise history. As old-time baseball fans know that the Senators, the original Senators, who had been in Washington, D.C. since 1901, moved to Minneapolis. The Griffith family moved the team to Minneapolis after the 1960 season, seeking brighter pastures and more attendance. So the American League quickly, to appease politicians, put an expansion team in Washington, which over their 11 years, they weren't very good. But April 10th, 1961, obviously was a big day, first game in franchise history. It was at Old Griffith Stadium. The only year the expansion Senators played at Griffith Stadium. In 1962, they moved into what was then DC Stadium, later became RFK Stadium, and finally has been torn down here mercifully in the last year or so, and a new stadium for the Commanders will go up in its place. But the Senators lost that day to the Chicago White Sox 4-3. But the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, threw out the first pitch that day, continuing a long legacy in the nation's capital, where Washington was always the first game of the season. Changed a lot now with television, obviously. The Nationals don't get that moniker every year. But, Evan, going back to 1910, when William Howard Taft, a rather burly man, if people remember, threw out the first pitch.
He was kind of the Rick Russell of presidential first pitch guys.
Yes, he was. But it was quite an event every year at Old Griffith Stadium, and then at D.C. Stadium, when the president would come out and throw out the first pitch. And Harry Truman, who was ambidextrous, threw it out different years with both hands, both arms, I should say.
They still should have taken a clue from Harry.
And every president took part in this at times. I mean, FDR didn't go out every year, obviously, during the war years, but he made his appearances. And when the Nationals, of course, the Senators, as we all know, moved to Texas after the 1971 season, had one winning record in those 11 years under Ted Williams in 1969, never drew more than 900,000. Was not an auspicious history there in Washington for the old expansion Senators. But opening day was always a big deal. And it's continued somewhat when the Nationals of home, George W. Bush, a familiar name to Ranger fans, throughout the first pitch there in 2005, and the last to do it was Barack Obama in 2010. But again, I think baseball has lost something with the tradition that they don't open the season anymore in Washington and Cincinnati, which you're familiar with to some extent. The parade, the Reds were always the first game in the National League, and the Senators were always the first game in the American League every year.
And, I really did like the tradition. The first pitch when the presidents threw it out in D.C. in the old days, they didn't go to the mound. They just kind of heaved it from the presidential box. And so it really wasn't a first pitch. It was just kind of a toss. A lot of years, all the players would gather around outside and try to catch it. That became kind of a tradition there, too. And the two managers would be in the stands, next to the president. They made for some pretty cool pictures. Do you know who the first president was to throw out a pitch from the mound? First president to throw out a pitch from the mound. I'm going to say it was Richard M. Nixon. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan. Right, at Wrigley Field. He was the first one to do it. And Ronald Reagan came to the Orioles opener after we had won the World Series in 1984. I think I've told this story before. He did not throw out the first pitch,
And I was not there. I was in Seattle with the Georgetown Hoyas doing the national championship basketball game, and it was kind of chaos on the field. But I've had the privilege to be around several presidents who threw out the first pitch for opening days. It was always going back to the franchise in Washington. It was always a big deal, and a lot of years that was the highlight of the season for the Senators. Although the team that moved to Minnesota became very good. They became the Twins, as I mentioned. By 1965, they had won the American League pennant. But left a very sad sack team in Washington. Frank Howard, of course, was by far their best-known player. Hondo hit a lot of home runs. Dick Bosman, later the Rangers pitching coach, was the top pitcher in expansion Senators history. But it's a tradition that's kind of missed in baseball these days.
John, as a presidential historian, is it a presidential-ophile? I don't know what the right term would be, but as somebody who is very interested in presidential history, and you do a lot of work at the George W. Bush Presidential Library on the SMU campus, what is your favorite all-time presidential first pitch? Because I know you have these ranked, probably.
Well, the Taft one was because it started the tradition, right? I mean, William Howard Taft, was over 350 pounds at the time. They had to build like a special, I think, elevator or something to get at the time, whatever, a lift to get him up to the seats. So you would throw out the first pitch. I think that was very special. I mean, the ones I've been around, I think, like I said, I've been fortunate. George H.W. Bush threw one out actually at Arlington Stadium in 1991. And, we all know what Arlington Stadium was like. But it gave the place a little bit of class on opening day, although the logistics for getting ready for that first pitch in that stadium, were a little rough. Setting up a command center, and there really wasn't a lot of places to do it. But I think I would probably go with that one because we could never get his son to throw out the first pitch while he was president at our ballpark. But I think we've talked about it. 2009, first year he was out of office. And again, I think you would agree, probably the most special first pitch we've both been around by presidents was in 2010 at the World Series, where 43 threw out the first pitch, accompanied by his dad to the mound with Nolan Ryan driving the golf cart. I'll never forget that.
That was a special moment, but I think the one presidential first pitch that is probably stuck in everybody's mind, the image, is George W. Bush going to the mound during the World Series in 2001 and delivering that first pitch in New York to future Ranger Todd Green behind the plate.
Right.
Obviously, there was a lot of patriotic meaning behind that, being in New York a month and a half after September 11th. President Bush was really at his best with his messaging at that point in time. And look, he went to the mound and delivered a strike.
With a bulletproof vest on, a very heavy bulletproof vest on from the top of the mound.
Yeah. So that one sticks out for me as a special image.
And I was there for that one too, although we were in the process of hiring a new general manager. But that's another story for another day.
Well, your priorities weren't in line at that point in time. But nevertheless, thank you for that page in presidential first pitch history. And I'm going to say that this will probably be the last archives that include a story from the non-Texas days.
Yes, it probably will. But I thought for this week's episode, as I was looking back, I wanted to remember those old Senators. And, we've had bad years come and go here since the team has moved to Texas. But then you just think about the Senators and you say, no year is too bad then. So, but anyway, that concludes this week's episode of SportsDay Rangers. And we'll see you next week. Evan?
You know where you guys can follow us. You can follow me on the Twitter at Evan_P_Grant. I'm also on the Blue Sky at the same handle. And you can find John on the X at Ranger Blake.
And I will always be there for you all. The Rangers, let's get some wins this weekend in Seattle, Evan, and then we open a long homestand. So we'll see you all next week.